The next big phase in the presidential campaign, Mitt Romney's choice of a Veep.
President Obama's immigration announcement comes as American attitudes toward immigration are changing.
Foreign affairs dominates the news, but not the decision-making of American voters. I'm Frank Newport, Gallup editor-in-chief.
I'm Susan Page, Washington bureau chief for USA Today.
And this is Election Matters. Well, Susan, you had the opportunity to interview, strangely enough, Marco Rubio, senator from Florida. You were down there in Florida, right, interviewing. A fascinating piece in USA Today. Will he be Mitt Romney's vice presidential nominee?
Well, I don't know. I think it's possible.
What does he say?
He doesn't want to talk about it. I believe he is being vetted by the Romney campaign, but so are some other people. He would be perhaps of some help in Florida, maybe some help with Latino voters, but he's only 41 years old and he's been a U.S. senator for less than 2 years.
And how many years had Obama been a U.S. senator?
Well, exactly. He's as experienced as Obama was, and he was also served in the state legislature and as the Speaker of the Florida State House. So in that sense, his experience is at least equivalent to what Obama's experience was when he ran for president, not for the number 2 job.
That's right. Now, of course, everybody has Sarah Palin on their mind because she was selected by McCain in 08, and the consensus is that the decision was made too quickly. She may not have been prepared for that role. At least that's how people portray it, particularly in the Game Change movie, right? So the question is on Rubio, will the same considerations come into effect? And it really raises a broader question, which is, will it really matter? Even did Sarah Palin matter? McCain lost. And that's the question, of course, we face and the Romney campaign faces. Does it really matter who he chooses? Obviously, they think it does.
I think one of the concerns is you want to do no harm. And the sense is that Sarah Palin's pick, she gave the ticket some enthusiasm, which John McCain was lacking, but she diverted a lot of attention from the issues that John McCain wanted to talk about. So I think the people involved in that campaign, who ran that campaign, do not think that was a successful pick. You want to pick somebody who does no harm, and maybe somebody who can help you in a key state. And beyond that, I think your expectations need to be pretty low, because usually vice presidents don't make very much difference.
That's the conventional wisdom. Now, our poll, which you mentioned in your piece today, our USA Today Gallup poll, showed that Rubio is unknown to 56% of Americans. At least that's the percent who don't rate him. Now, you'd say, geez, over half of Americans don't know who he is. But we kind of look down the list here, and there are a lot of previous Veeps that, when we first asked about him, had even higher don't knows. Palin, when we first asked, had 71% of Americans did not know who the governor of Alaska was. And we go down to Joe Biden. We first asked about him in April '07. Now, granted, that's a year before he was selected by Obama, but 55% of Americans didn't know who he was, and yet he went on to be selected. So the fact that Rubio doesn't have a national name ID, I don't think is a deal killer at all based on history, because a lot of unknowns have been selected.
I think that's right. And we also asked about Rob Portman, the senator from Ohio, who's also seen as someone on the short list. He's even less well known than Senator Rubio.
What about Jack Kemp?
Well, Jack Kemp, at the point, in the first time you tested him, he was not known by 49%, so not so very far away.
Sure.
Before
and he had been a pro football player. The reason I bring him up, he was Dole's Veep pick in '96, if you don't remember, but he had been a pro football player. You would think he would have very high name ID before he became a congressman from upstate New York, yet half of Americans didn't know who he was. They lost, of course, that ticket, but fascinating. We'll wait and see. And one last question, any sense of when Romney going to make this announcement? Well,
the assumption's been he wouldn't announce this until right before the convention because he needs to build some drama. But there's also a line of thought that goes, maybe you do it earlier so you can do fundraising and so you can get some of the press vetting out of the way before the convention. And so I think I would have to say the honest answer is, I don't know.
And maybe the Romney campaign doesn't know either
maybe
at this
so.
point. Immigration, you mentioned that, we mentioned it. The big announcement came from Barack Obama on Friday that he would not deport, I think this is a fair summary, 800,000 children of illegal immigrants. He'll lay off that and let them stay in the U.S. The implication is that he's trying to reach the Hispanic vote.
Well, and his position with the Hispanic voters is very strong. 2 out of 3 Hispanic voters say they plan to vote for him. That's comparable to what he got 4 years ago.
And his job approval, 61%,
right,
which is about 15 points better where he is among the average American.
So this may solidify his standing with Hispanic voters and also may create some enthusiasm, a lot of disappointment in the Hispanic community about the failure to enact a comprehensive immigration reform, which is something President Obama talked about as a candidate 4 years ago. But certainly this solidifies one of his most a key part of his coalition.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned attitudes. Our new polling show that we've had a shift on immigration attitudes. One of the key ones is we give a trade-off to voters. Would you focus on, sealing the borders, keeping immigrants out, illegal immigrants out, or doing something with illegal immigrants already in this country? And now the shift for the first time is more attention on not keeping them from flowing in, but dealing with them here in this country. Maybe because the flow has actually has flowed to a trickle, the immigrants, particularly from Mexico, that have been coming over because of the recession.
I think that's right. This may be a case where reality matters. We know that both because of stricter border enforcement and also because of the weak economy here, we've seen a real decline in the number of Mexican Americans and other Latin Americans coming over our southern border.
So Americans are saying, hey, deal with the immigrants that are here. And maybe Obama's announcement is part of that, right? It's an announcement about the illegal immigrants already in this country.
It could be. And by talking about people who were brought here as kids, not of their own accord, who have grown up here as Americans, gone to American schools, it's really the part of the immigrant community that I think has the biggest tug on the heartstrings for a lot of Americans. Speaking
of Mexico, foreign countries, Obama was down there for the G20 summit, and not just those leaders like the Russian leader, but also Greece and Europe. Greece in Europe, along with other countries over there in Europe, is really huge explosion of problems and potential problems, and of course Egypt with the new election results. And yet we don't see that the average American is that concerned about foreign affairs when making his or her decision on who to vote for.
It's interesting. This must take so much of the president's time, and politically speaking, there's no payoff. On the poll that you released last week that talked about why are you voting for one candidate or the other, you go through 15 issues before you get one that relates to national security or foreign affairs. It's clearly not on people's minds. It's not helping him win votes, unless I guess it affects the U.S. economy, and that would have an effect.
Yeah, but we asked about how much attention you're paying to the Euro crisis at May 29th, end of May, and it was 49% following it closely, and that's 11 points below even the average for everything we've asked about. So it's just not a huge concern at this point, I think it's fair to say, on the part of Americans or on voters' minds what's going on internationally. Maybe it should be, but those are the facts.
Now, Frank, what is your most fascinating finding of the week?
Well, speaking of that, we ask Americans, rate your confidence in the economy, how well the economy is going in 5 different venues, so to speak. They would be your local area, your state, the U.S., Europe, and then the rest of the world. And the closer to home you are, the more positive Americans are. In other words, Americans actually were pretty positive about the economy in their local area, less so about their state, less so about the U.S., less so about Europe, and the least of all about the world.
And of course, that's something like we find when we ask, what do you think about your member of Congress, or most members of Congress? People feel better about their own member than they do about the body as a whole.
Yeah, that's a kind of a fundamental principle of polling. One final point, we say, how satisfied are you with the way things are going in the U.S.? Yick, 20% of the. How satisfied are you with your personal life? It's like multiples higher than that. So that's good news, right?
I guess so.
Most Americans are puddling along pretty happily, even though they're disappointed of the way things are, about the way things are going nationally and internationally. Well, that's it for this week. We'll be back next week. Maybe we'll get a decision by the Supreme Court by next week.
We're waiting for it.
I'm Frank Newport, Gallup Editor-in-Chief.
I'm Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief for USA Today.
And this is Election Matters.